Good morning, everyone. It's Emily here from the Improvement Service. Thank you for joining today's webinar on affordable credit. So with me, I've got Karen, and I've got my colleague Alison, and we've got Neil from Carnegie UK Trust, and we've also got Sharon from Scotcash Online. So just to let you know how today will go. So I think Karen will start us off, and then it'll be Neil, and then Sharon last, and then that leaves us about 20 minutes at the end for questions. You can now ask questions throughout the webinar using the grey chat box, and we'll just pick them up at the very end. So without further ado, it's Karen, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm Karen Carrick, and I'm a project manager in the Improving Outcomes team with the Improvement Service. The rest of the panellists that are going to be speaking this morning, as Emily has said, are Neil Alexander, who's an associate at Carnegie Trust UK, working on the development and implementation of the recommendations from their Gateway to Affordable Credit report, which was issued in February 2016. And Sharon, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer at Scotcash and has been in that post for over 5 years now, but previously worked for Glasgow City Council. We're holding this webinar today really to highlight the fact that we are launching a briefing for elected members on affordable credit, and that will be published later this week. You will be sent a link to it as soon as the report is ready. In the course of the webinar, what we're going to do is Neil's going to talk about what is meant by affordable credit, because can be some confusion over what this actually includes and why it's really important. Sharon, who's actually a provider of affordable credit, will talk about the services provided by Scotcash and the difference that they make to the lives of vulnerable people. And will conclude by suggesting issues members and decision makers may wish to consider. But before we hear from Neil, a few words about the current context. The contribution that access to affordable credit can make to addressing poverty and income inequality has been recognised, and it's now reflected in national strategies like the Fairer Scotland Action Plan and the Child Poverty Action Plan. Now, there is a recognition that local authorities are key partners in delivering the changes that these initiatives seek to support. Credit is a part of everyday life, and I think we need to recognise that all should be able to access it. And with Christmas a few weeks ago, there's a recognition that people often do need to borrow money on a short-term basis, and a small amount. It could be to provide a child's Christmas present or a birthday present or some emergency that crops up. And actually being able to access affordable credit can make a real difference to reducing household costs and maximising incomes for the most disadvantaged groups, who are very often living in vulnerable communities. So it's not just the individuals who benefit, it's the communities that they live in too. I think we recognise, or we do, that the poverty premium, that being poor costs more. And the poverty premium means that individuals experiencing poverty pay more for essential goods and services. It's not just about financial inequality. They're actually paying more for washing machines, for pay-as-you-go meters. There's lots of examples of the way that the poverty premium operates. And a way of addressing that is to include options for affordable credit. The consequences of people experiencing poverty and unmanageable debt are dire, and it can have life-changing effects on people, and they're not positive ones. Homelessness, relationship breakdown, ill health, both physical and mental, and isolation, because people don't have the resources to take part in community activities and do the things that most people take for granted. And I think that's really important, that we need to recognise that everybody has the right to a basic quality of life, and they need to have the resources to do that. And opportunities for people living in poverty of all ages can be severely restricted. Now, local authorities already support affordable credit options. Credit unions operate in all local authorities areas and provide assistance and support that can meet local needs. They provide opportunities to save and borrow money, and in some occasions, some instances, they are taking innovative action, for example, funeral poverty loans, school saver clubs. There's good examples of what they can offer. At least 6 local authorities in Scotland are supporting 2 community development financed institutions, or CDFIs. Now, Sharon will talk more about Scotcash, which is one of these CDFIs, but I should mention that another, Conduit Scotland, is supported by Falkirk, Fife and West Lothian councils. And support from local authorities to CDFIs can be provided in both cash and in kind. And they do make a real difference to the financial well-being of vulnerable individuals. In 2017, these two CDFIs lent £2.25 million to low-income households, saving borrowers around £1 million when compared to high-cost alternatives. Both don't just offer loans, they offer access to other services and support. I know that Sharon will talk in a bit more detail about that, but Scotcash has 2 embedded CAB debt advisors who offer a wraparound service providing loans, money advice and bank accounts. Whilst Conduit Scotland do not provide direct access to advice services, they do make referrals to existing local-based services. So I'm now going to pass to Neil, who will describe in more detail why access to affordable credit is so important and the critical role CDFIs can play in addressing income inequality. Over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Neil Alexander. I'm a freelance consultant. I'm an associate with the Carnegie UK Trust. You'll be familiar with Carnegie. You'll be familiar with the name. You'll be familiar with Carnegie Libraries. The Trust itself was established in 1913, about a decade after Andrew Carnegie sold his businesses in the United States. He sold his businesses to JP Morgan, the man, not the bank, for a figure of $480 million in 1901. So $480 million in 1901, not an insignificant sum of money in 2019. Carnegie's personal fortune at that point was about 225 million, and his target was to give all of that money away in his lifetime. He managed to do that all bar 20 million. Many of the Carnegie Trusts are endowed in the United States. The one in the UK is based in Dunfermline, small town in Fife, as you know, and with a remit of improving well-being for the people of the United Kingdom and Ireland. So Carnegie work on a range of subjects. I work specifically on the subject of affordable credit for them, and I have worked on that subject certainly for the last 20 years in a range of roles, looking at the impact of a lack of access to financial products and services for low-income households. Carnegie themselves work on libraries, they work on towns, they work on well-being, we work on the issue of kindness. In fact, our most downloaded report is around kindness. We work on measuring job quality, on universal basic income, and as I say, I work on the subject of credit. We can all agree that credit is emotive. It is emotive for everyone who's kind of watching this webinar. We will all have a different view about what is fair and what is unfair, what we should save for, what we should borrow for, what is a need and what is a want. We can certainly agree that it's emotive. It's very emotive when you start to talk about credit in relation to low-income households and borrowing money. It's Carnegie's view, and we support a national action group to do this, that there ought to be more affordable credit for low-income households in the UK. Our national action group consists of a number of organisations, including Royal Bank of Scotland and Virgin Money, Step Change, Money Advice Service, Money Advice Scotland, Poverty Alliance, Young Scot, Glasgow Caley University and the Scottish Government, and did involve Elma Murray, who was the Chief Executive of North Ayrshire Council until her recent retirement. We're working on a range of subjects. I don't have time to talk about them all, but the Carnegie website will talk in detail about our work. So let's get on to some of the context here. In the UK, these two charts here indicate a period of time. They're both the same periods of time, from the election of the Blair government in 1997, which is on the left-hand side of both charts, to the present day. What do they show us? They show us on the left-hand side that unsecured credit has never been higher in the UK, totaling about 215 billion at the moment. And it also shows us that savings as a ratio for households has never been lower, just under 4%. So the issue here is about financial resilience. People do not have the means, and increasingly do not have the means, to withstand financial shocks, often seeking borrowing as a means of addressing expenditure or unexpected bills. Scotland, users of credit. This chart comes from the FCA's Financial Lives survey, a comprehensive survey of 13,000 people interviewed face-to-face, extrapolated UK-wide. It's available on the FCA website in some detail. The figures at the bottom, the areas drawn out at the bottom are the FCA's areas, not mine, but they cover from left to right, United Kingdom, Scotland, and then various parts of Scotland, South West, East, North East, Highlands and Islands, the G postcodes and the EH postcodes. I would draw your attention to two things here. The broken line at the bottom of the chart is the percentage of people in each of those areas who have high cost credit on their credit file. So in the UK that's 6%, in Scotland it's 8%, but of course if you go to the G postcodes it's much higher at 12%, as it is also in what is designated as the northeast of Scotland. The yellow bar just above that represents overdrafts, people who are using their overdraft. Again, many of the people listening to this webinar will be using an overdraft, either authorised or unauthorised. Again, I don't have terribly much time today to talk about the issue of overdraft, but it is a persistent and problematic area, often for low-income households, particularly unauthorised. But if you're sitting with an overdraft today, you can know that the firm that you are borrowing that money from is probably making about 25 pence in every pound of your authorised overdraft. If you're sitting with an unauthorised overdraft, and the vast majority of unauthorised overdrafts go to people in the lowest income quartile, then the yield on that money for every pound that is unauthorised, the firm that is lending that money will be making about £2.50. So I'll repeat that, £2.50 for every pound of unauthorised overdraft. So, and that's not what I'm here to talk about today, but I will another day perhaps talk about overdrafts. So there are issues relating to what increases the demand for credit. So the UK are credit users. There are various reasons why demand is so high. Average consumer credit debt in the UK is about £8,000 per household. The average borrowing is about £4,000 per household. So there's a whole range of reasons as to why people are using credit. This is the current state of the high-cost credit market has changed. It is not common to some views, homogeneous mass of people all borrowing from the same types of lenders. It's a market that has changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. It's changed for a number of reasons. It's changed because the Financial Conduct Authority took over control of that market in 2014. It changed because of the introduction of the payday lending cap in 2015. So I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of points on this slide here. The blue bars on the chart represent the customers who are using high-cost short-term credit, sometimes known as payday lending. That has dropped seismically since the introduction of the payday cap and greater scrutiny that the FCA are putting into this. The orange bars represent the UK's leading home-collected credit or doorstep lending company, Provident, whose numbers have also dropped dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. The grey, which you can not really see too well on this chart, represents Brighthouse, the leading rent-to-own company in the UK. Many of the people in the webinar will be familiar with Provident, with Brighthouse, and with many of the high-cost lenders. The total drop-off in those numbers from 2012 to 2017 is about 1.8 or 1.9 million customers. So Carnegie are interested in two things here. Who are the excluded people from the high point on the left-hand side of the chart? And where are they now going for their credit? Because credit is still in demand. So this chart is linked to that last one, and it's really just the Brighthouse figures. Brighthouse are operate in the rent-to-own market, a market that will soon have a cap imposed on it probably from April of next year. A cap similar to the payday lending cap of 100% of the original cost. But the significant thing here is what's happened to Brighthouse when they were not subject to the cap over the last 5 or 6 years with greater scrutiny from the FCA. What has happened here is that Brighthouse's numbers have dropped. Like all these lenders, the numbers have dropped and the customer has shifted. So we've seen this shift everywhere. We've seen a shift in payday, for example, from a median net income of 15,600 to 20,000. We are seeing a shift in the type of individual who is being accepted by high-cost lenders. but we're also seeing a shift so the numbers are dropping and the customer is shifting. In this case, the shift is between what Brighthouse call more and less risky customers. Counterintuitively, more risky customers were better revenue drivers for Brighthouse because they didn't pay late fees, default fees, returning the goods, that type of thing. The better customers don't make for better revenues for Brighthouse, and as a result, the black dotted line shows you what's happened when they have shifted this customer. So they've shifted customers from more risky to less risky. And if you look at the last 2 years, either the same quarters every year for the last 6 years, their profits have plummeted. Brighthouse are in serious difficulty in terms of what their future business plan will look like. And within the last 3 months, they've lost both their finance director, but they've also just lost their chief executive. Brighthouse in serious difficulty. People who use Brighthouse use it for a variety of different reasons, but there's an interesting stat in a recent FCA review which says 3 out of 4 people who used the white goods at Brighthouse used it because they were replacing damaged goods. These are people who were not able to go without. These are people who needed a fridge or needed a washing machine or needed a television set. So the increasingly excluded, people who are now being denied credit, and you've got to remember here that this is not people leaving lenders, this is lenders leaving people. The increasingly excluded are the same as it ever was. People on the lowest incomes, people living in social housing, people with limited credit histories or poor or thin credit files. They are the most likely to be now excluded from this type of lending. This should be in some ways a good thing, and we welcome at Carnegie tighter regulation and scrutiny and greater checks on affordability. We welcome all that, but we worry that as we press down in one area, we are not able to uplift in another. Even though the market has shifted dramatically, it's still pretty significant. So we have, in this chart here, everything above the line, everything above the broken line is a not-for-profit lender, and everything below the line is a for-profit lender. So this is the amount of borrowing undertaken in 2016. So it's still very significant despite the drop-off from previous years. So what you're seeing here is catalogue credit, high-cost credit, home credit, rent-to-own, that type of thing. And I've split the 2 credit union bars at the top, one from Northern Ireland, the other from England, Wales and Scotland, because Northern Ireland is a kind of rule for itself because about 40% of the population in Northern Ireland are credit union members. For every one person with a debt to a not-for-profit lender in the UK, there will be 24 people with a debt to a high-cost one. Credit unions are often cited as the solution to some of this problem. They are part of the solution. Carnegie just commissioned some research recently which supports some other research that's been done elsewhere about what is the demographic of Scotland's credit union customer. I'll come on to that in a second. But Scotland's credit unions are the proportion of people who are members of credit union Scotland is greater than England or Wales. Those numbers at the bottom are the number of adults as a percentage who are members of credit unions. So in Northern Ireland, it's about 40% of adults are credit union members. In Scotland, it's closer to 8%. In England, it's not touched yet, 2%. At Carnegie, we're working with a range of credit unions across the Central Belt to work with them on employer engagement and payroll deduction with low-income working people. And that is exactly where I think credit unions should be positioned. The credit union movement in Scotland is seeing a rise in its share balance, a rise in the loans it's issuing, a rise in its borrowers, a rise in its members, a rise, sadly, in its arrears, and a reduction in its overall number. We commissioned some research recently undertaken by Ipsos MORI, which looked at the Scottish Household Survey and gave us a snapshot of what the credit union customer in Scotland looks like. The credit union customer in Scotland broadly looks like Scotland in terms of percentages, in terms of percentage of homeowners, of lone parents, of people earning more than £20,000 a year. This may or may not come as a surprise, but this is exactly where the credit union movement in Scotland should be positioned. That's not to say that the credit unions are not engaged in lending and supporting lowest income households. Of course they are. But proportionately, that's a very difficult thing for credit unions to do when they have a capped lending rate. They are indeed a broader church and ought to be a broader church, hence our work with a number of credit unions to look at payroll deduction. At Carnegie, we support the piece on the graph that I showed you earlier on, which is almost minuscule, the social lender community finance sector, which is not limited to geography or to a price cap, and can price to cover cost. These are lenders like, and Sharon will talk shortly about Scotcash, one of the prime examples of these organisations. But there are others. Fair for You and Conduit both operate in Scotland. Fair for You are a white goods lender who operate in all 32 local authorities. Conduit, as Karen said at the beginning, operating in 3 local authorities, Fife, West Lothian and Falkirk. These are organisations that are social businesses. These are social enterprises. No private shareholders to satisfy, no fat cats, fair salary ratios, no bonus culture, and they price loans to cover cost. And they specifically lend to lowest income households. So the proportion of lone parents, the proportion of people earning under £15,000, the proportion of people in social housing, all of those indicators are met by the loans issued by Scotcash, Conduit, Fair for You, or the UK's largest social lender, Moneyline. In all of these organisations, there is no bonus culture, there's no pressure sales, and there's a range of gateway services offered by these organisations. So I won't steal Sharon's thunder. Sharon will tell you herself around the embedded debt and money advice officers that are in Scotcash. But these lenders can have the opportunity to be priced to cover costs and be sustainable, to deliver to those who are clearly excluded from mainstream credit or are increasingly excluded from mainstream credit, including high cost credit. They can link to wider financial goals. So you see, for example, links to saving accounts. The Moneyline example I gave a second ago, Moneyline round up payments to sweep into a saving account, and are also about to round up payments for home insurance. These are organisations where the needs of the borrower align with the motivations of the lender, and these are the type of organisations that we would like to see given more support across Scotland. These are fair credit places. Whether they are delivered in branch or online, they can offer a range of services. Credit where credit is appropriate, but if it's not appropriate, then other forms of additional support. Again, Sharon will say more about the Scotcash example in a minute. There are significant challenges for these lenders. They are unknown in many cases. They are very small. They lack infrastructure. They lack the investment capital they need to grow, and they are working on their way of being financially sustainable. At Carnegie, we are working with a range of organisations to support the increase in these organisations. So we've set up our own loan fund. It now sits at £2.5 million. We made our first loan of £500,000 to Fair for You. We work very closely with the End High Cost Credit Alliance, led by the actor Michael Sheen, who is about to lever in significant sums of money to support these very organisations. But probably the greatest challenge for these social lenders is the issue of the APR and price, which people can get quite het up about. So what we're going to show you now, or what I thought we were going to show you now, was a video, which doesn't appear to be there. Okay. Okay. Sorry, what I thought we had here was a 2-minute video of Michael Sheen explaining what the importance of APR was and why it's a misnomer. So APR is it's like looking at a thermometer to see if it's going to rain. It's in the same ballpark. It's important, but APR itself, particularly on short-term small sum money, is not at all helpful. So this chart shows you the likely interest, the interest that would be paid on a £500 loan over 26 weeks. The social lenders, the not-for-profit lenders, being towards the top of that chart, increasingly higher as you go down towards the Moneyline total, but I would point out significantly lower, cheaper but not cheap, significantly lower than many other high-cost alternatives. And you've got to ask, what are people's alternatives increasingly? So, in summary, my 20 minutes are up. Credit isn't a substitute for better wages or benefits or any of that. When it's appropriate, it is helpful for low-income households to smooth expenditure. APRs are not inherently unfair, and high-sounding APRs are not inherently unfair. It isn't always appropriate to issue credit, and we recognise that there are a group of people who are increasingly unable to meet any form of repayment, and we would support anything around an extension of social welfare or nil interest loans for certain groups of people. What we currently have is people using finite solutions. People who've been denied access to credit elsewhere are borrowing from their friends or family. So we know that 3.6 million people in the UK are borrowing from friends and family, or they're defaulting on non-priority debts. So Step Change in Scotland tell us that in 2010, 18% of people who were eligible to pay the council tax were in arrears. That figure is now 45%. At some point, the councils will come and get that money back. At some point, low-income households borrowing from other low-income households will not be able to be done anymore. So these solutions are finite. We support operationally sustainable, not-for-profit lenders, and we would welcome any conversations with people watching today around how we might increase the extension of that in your area. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Okay, morning everybody, and thank you Karen and the team for inviting me to participate in the webinar. I think also an acknowledgement to the Improvement Service for creating the report and also for hosting the webinar, because awareness of affordable credit and how it impacts on anti-poverty strategies is more important now than ever. We've already heard from Neil about how options are decreasing for the financially excluded in Scotland. So it is important that we continue to discuss and debate and consider how we can address that. So I'm just going to take you through a very quick background to Scotcash. Some of you may already know about Scotcash, but I'll assume you don't know anything, and talk a wee bit about what we do and why it's important. So in terms of who we are, we're a company limited by guarantee without having share capital. And as Neil mentioned, we are a community interest company, and we are therefore subject to an asset lock which prevents the extraction of profits. We're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, a member of Responsible Finance, who are a trade body, and more recently we have extended our operating area from Glasgow, then Scotland, and now across the whole of the UK. So our company aims are ultimately to provide loans to those who are unable to access mainstream credit, and that's important. It's those people who can't generally get an overdraft. It's those people who can't go to their bank and get a loan. It's people who are subject to having to go to Provident, pounds for pocket, Sunny Loans, these really expensive, high-cost lenders, and we're clear that is our key customer group. We also provide a whole range of associated financial products and services, like access to bank accounts, generally basic bank accounts, linking into credit union savings accounts. We're not a deposit taker. We never anticipate becoming a deposit taker. There's a huge credit union movement available across the whole of Scotland, so we rely on them, providing debt and benefits advice, as well as financial budgeting and help with fuel advice. And our overall governance is provided by our board of directors, which jointly oversee the activities of the company, and they provide the overall strategic direction. They're comprised of Glasgow City Council, Glasgow Housing Association, NG Homes and RBS, and we have an independent member on there as well. We began trading in 2007 and were developed as really as a direct result of the wider financial inclusion ambitions, even then, of Glasgow, not just Glasgow City Council, but the strategic group that was set up to tackle financial exclusion in the city. And the strategic group, their primary concern was really to look at how could we augment what credit unions were doing, because we knew they weren't able to serve the whole of the market, and how could we look at providing access to bank accounts, but do it within a much more strategic approach. The strategic planning group subsequently made recommendations for the establishment of Scotcash, our 20-year business plan, and Neil will remember he was involved in some of that development work. We were looking to identify a banking partner and look at the potential financial commitment from others. And so Scotcash is quite unique in terms of CDFIs and even credit unions to a large extent, because we were developed strategically and sit strategically within the broader financial inclusion strategy of Glasgow City Council, which is a strategic group, and we formed a key part of the city's financial inclusion strategy right from 2007 up to the present date. Glasgow Housing Association was a key supporter in terms of their ambitions around stock transfer and helping their tenants become financially stable. And the reason that I've put up the mission statement and vision there is so that it gives you a flavour that we're not just a loans company. And that is from the get-go. I'm pretty sure politically it wouldn't have been approved had it just been about loans. So it is embedded within a financial inclusion approach. We all know some of the challenges that our local communities face in relation to financial exclusion, and I won't go over the stats, and Neil's highlighted some of that as well. So it's hugely important that when we're looking at affordable credit, we're looking at it within the whole remit of financial inclusion. It wasn't cheap to set up Scotcash. It cost £2.3 million. And we generated that funding from a range of partners, including the City Council, the Housing Associations, Community Scotland and DWP. And that funding continues to be recycled and continues to provide community benefits. So it's a real legacy in terms of that initial funding that continues to prove valuable. And that commitment to building Scotcash and implementing Scotcash and building the capacity of Scotcash has actually been further strengthened by some of the recommendations in the more recent, or 2015 strategic review of community finance, which basically said in Glasgow the amount of money leaving the city in the form of interest payments to the high cost credit sector, the commercial sector that Neil outlined earlier, is about £20 million a year, which is a massive sum. And if only 10% of those people were to switch from using high cost credit, the cost savings would be nearly 1.8 million. So imagine if you were to amplify that right across Scotland, the value of that would be absolutely enormous. Obviously, financial inclusion and affordable credit specifically is now within the Fair Scotland Action Plan, the Child Poverty Action Plan. And I think the value of sitting within a strategic context like that is that there is convening power. There's convening power of the Scottish Government, there's convening power of local authorities to bring together a whole range of actors in this space, whether it be Citizens Advice Bureau, credit unions, the CDFI, fuel advice projects. So they have that convening power. And that's quite unique in Scotland. And from my work right across the UK, really happens best in Scotland. That also gives a legitimacy to the CDFI model, which is relatively unknown, and it helps get over some of the challenges that surround the APR issue, which I don't think anybody should underestimate. Those supporters that you see there are just some of our supporters, and helping them understand the APR and why CDFIs, although they look expensive in terms of APR, actually are a much better proposition for those people who are effectively being drained of any disposable income they have by high cost lenders. That's so crucial to get across, and it's a shame we couldn't see that film, and if we're able to send that link, I think the Michael Sheen film really gets that across well. And these supporters have really recognised that actually it's that mixed economy of provision that makes a really good, strong model. It's not one size fits all. It's not whether or not you should have a credit union in your area or a CDFI, but it's rather about you should have both, and you should have both that work with your advice provision, whether that be debt advice, welfare rights, income maximisation, financial capability. And for our experience over the last 10 years, 11 years, that's worked well, and we're able to demonstrate that has a real benefit to the customer. So it's an integrated service provision. And I just wanted to quickly show in terms of our business plan for Scotcash, demonstrate that it's not just about credit. It's about sustainability. It's about making sure we have a model that works, that is not going to require public funding forever and a day, or grant funding from anywhere else, that it can stand on its own 2 feet, that it delivers the products and the services that people need within that auspice of financial inclusion, and that it does that within a collaborative and partnership approach. And crucially, that we're not working in isolation. We're trying to influence policy. We're trying to get changes. We're working with the Financial Conduct Authority to make sure that they understand the impact of high cost credit and what they can do to support the alternatives. So what do we do? Very quickly, these are the basic services that we provide, but that they are all integrated. They're not separate. So for example, when somebody comes to Scotcash for a loan, and I have to say, from my experience of working in the debt advice sector, I know how hard it is for people to seek debt advice, how difficult it is to convince somebody that that's what they need to do. And the value of the Scotcash model is that you will have a huge number of people who are credit hungry. We've already seen that people really struggle to know where to go now because these high cost lenders are maybe moving away from the risky market. So we know that there's a real demand there for credit, and we think that our model of being able to take that demand and look at it in terms of what are the real needs of that individual, so we can identify straight away that there are debt issues there, or that that customer doesn't have a bank account. That is the strong premise of the model, that we can take that initial engagement from that customer who probably maybe maybe in debt, but had never thought about going to the local CAB agency. We can then intervene and we can provide advice that suits their circumstances. So we won't always lend in all circumstances, of course. We will look at whether or not that customer really requires a bank account, first of all, and we have a range of partners that we work with to deliver that. We will look at that, we will provide that service. We will then look at whether or not there are debt issues there, and if there are, and lending is not appropriate, we will implement those debt services for that customer with their authority, of course, and make sure that they're getting the right advice at the right time, and therefore interrupting that cycle of debt. And that's really quite unique. The challenge now is, how do we do that when we move right across the UK and we move to online, and how do we make sure financial inclusion remains at the heart of what we do? So that's an ongoing challenge for us. Some of the other things that we do around savings accounts, so we can see if somebody has any financial resilience in relation to savings. They may never have saved before, and we have a range of partnerships with credit unions that can help them do that. Similarly, we can see if somebody's living in fuel poverty. We can tell straight away, because what we're using is that customer's bank statements to assess their affordability and creditworthiness before we lend to them. And that's, again, quite unique. In the commercial market, generally, the lenders will use a score, which tells you a bit, but doesn't tell you everything. When we're using the bank statements, you can get really under the skin of that customer's financial circumstances and their financial lives. Do they have £1 left in their bank account before a benefit payment's put in the next day? Or do they have a bit of a cushion there? Are they taking all their money out in one go? Are they failing direct debits, which is an indicator of financial stress? So there's a whole range of things that we can do to get the right advice to that individual. And the loan is based on their current situation. So we're regulated by the FCA. We have to ensure that loans are affordable and that the customer can bear the weight of additional credit or new credit. But we will look at benefits as income, and we will look at that individual's circumstances. It is not the computer says no, and that's crucial, because our customers don't really fit into that bracket. Most of our customers have extremely low credit scores, I mean really low, where mainstream lenders wouldn't even look at them because of those scores. So it's that more sort of in-depth personal service that you don't really get from the more commercial models. So as I said earlier, we help open RBS accounts, Virgin Money accounts. We now work with the Bank of Scotland, And what we can do is we can help get over those issues in terms of photographic ID. So there are some concessions that we're able to get and help our customers open a bank account with maybe a sort of rental agreement and a benefit award letter. So our customers generally wouldn't have passports or driving licenses and so struggle really to open bank accounts. So we can address some of that stuff. Again, we have a whole range of partners across Scotland that we can tap into where we think our customer might benefit from saving a bit. And I think that's something that CDFIs are particularly good at. Neil mentioned Moneyline, who are probably the top leaders in terms of getting savings accounts open for their customers. And I think there are lots of things that we can continue to do to strengthen that. But it's about customers, when they come to us, they may be looking for a £500 loan at Christmas, and we can talk to them about, well, maybe if you set up a savings account now, you might not need a loan next Christmas and you might have savings there. So it's about financial capability and financial resilience. It's not telling people how to spend their money, but it's helping them understand how they can future-proof and protect themselves against financial shocks. And these are some of the other providers that we work with. Many of our customers, a significant minority of our customers are single parents. Single parents are disproportionately affected by financial exclusion and the poverty premium. So we understand it's important that there may be other things that are affecting their financial lives or that are impacting on their lives as a result of their financial circumstances. So again, it's about getting the right advice at the right time. In terms of what we've achieved, these are the things that we've achieved. This is what we've done for our customers. This is how much we've saved our customers in interest payments. And these are all really great statistics and obviously make a difference in local communities. But in terms of what that does for an individual, we hear stories all the time and feedback all the time from our customers that say that for once they feel as though they are valued as a customer, that they are being given the chance to get something that's a bit more affordable, that they're listened to in terms of their financial circumstances, and that they can come back to us throughout their whole lives to talk to us about some of the issues that they might be facing in terms of their finances. And that's because it's that one-stop shop, it's that one engagement that looks across all of these issues related to financial inclusion. And that is the real strength of the model, as I've mentioned. Our customer surveys are always really positive. And again, I think when we set up Scotcash, one of the things that we asked people living in local communities before we developed Scotcash and wanted to take their views on how we developed it and what we did, one of the things that I was struck by was the fact that they had so little expectation of their financial services providers. They had so little expectation that they could get a good deal, that they could get any deal. And what we're trying to do in Scotcash is really challenge that and challenge that failure of the market to deliver for what is a real significant number of people who, more than anybody, need that support and need that help. So I hope I've kept the time there, just about.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone, for presenting. I think we are now...
Thank goodness, I thought I might have been talking to nobody.
No, you're okay. We are now open to questions, so just a reminder for everyone that you can use the grey chat box to ask your questions. So we've actually had a few. I think the first two are for you, Neil. So the first one is, on the Scotland credit uses slide, does Tayside come under east of Scotland or northeast?
I need to go and check, but I don't have the information in front of me. But from memory, I suspect it comes under the northeast. But I will go and check that, and if the individual, I can write to that individual this afternoon and tell them, or I can put it back to you.
Thank you. Next one is, why have you not included the growth of credit union custom?
I think I did. I think I
don't know
said.
if it was, maybe you mentioned it after the question was asked.
The credit union customer in Scotland has grown. I think we said in the slide that the share balance had grown, the borrowers had grown, the numbers had grown. I think we're at 339,000 in Scotland, which is terrific. I mean, the growth of credit unions in Scotland to about 8% is excellent. In cities like Glasgow, it's about 25%. The point I was making around the credit union movement is that there is a broad church, and that is the way that's where it ought to be positioned. It is very, very difficult for credit unions to lend money at a capped interest rate of 3% on small sums of credit. So £500 over 26 weeks, very difficult to generate income that covers cost. The amount outstanding at Scotland's credit unions at the last set of statistics, the amount outstanding was £2,688 per borrower. So 119,000 people owed 320 million in total, 2,688 individually. My point on that, I think, would be that there are a range of individuals who have a need for credit. But £2,688 as an average loan size is not someone looking for a washing machine or a cooker. These are sort of £400, £500 loans. Sharon would be able to tell you better than me, but I think the average loan at Scotcash will be £500, £600. They'll be certainly sub 1,000. All of the CDFIs that we were talking about, their average loans will be very small to a very similar customer group.
Thank you. I've got another question here, I think open to everyone. For those clients in greatest need, is there an opportunity for ethical lenders, social enterprises to have access to a secondary financial product based on the no interest loan interest model?
I can probably start off on that. The UK government in the last budget announced a feasibility study for something called a nil interest loan scheme. It's based on an Australian model called Good Shepherd. Nil interest loans, there will never be the amount of loan capital available to make those anything other than a kind of pretty small impact on people. So, for example, I know that the figures in Australia, which the model is based on, the Good Shepherd model, you are looking at subsidy over the last, 6 years. It had about 81 million Australian dollars, about 80 million. Let's say 80 million Australian dollars was the cost. Was the subsidy that Good Shepherd got. It made about 136,000 loans in that period of time. But the income from that lending was, of course, nil, which means that it's a subsidised model. And in the current climate, subsidising that level of nil interest becomes very difficult. The UK government have said they want to look at it, and they recognise that there is a group of people in the lowest income decile, probably the lowest income quintile, who will be unable to pay any interest on a loan, but there's certainly a move to see what the feasibility study of a nil interest loan will look like. So that, associated with things like Scottish Welfare Fund or community care grants, and so on, is where some people who will just be unable to access any other forms of credit will have to go. If you need a washing machine, you get a washing machine in some cases. But the Good Shepherd scheme is one that the UK government is interested in seeing how they can look at it. But I don't see how that will ever be of the type of scale that we're talking about that would address the kind of whole problem. I think the long-term solution is building sustainable lending models that provide gateway services.
I mean, I think I would add to that, and I think you're right, Neil. The issues around scale and sustainability, and we know that so an equivalent, really, the no interest loan is basically the social fund loan, isn't it? And we know that some of the challenges around the social fund relate to demand outstripping supply. It's really great for people who have no other options and who really require that support, and I would advocate the continuation of that. But it's limited in terms of who it can reach. So, for example, if in Scotcash, if we have an individual who is in financial circumstances that are deemed too dire to lend to, we will, or even if we are able to lend to them, we will look at whether or not there are any grants available to them through the welfare system, first and foremost. So we do make use of the social fund and various other welfare related grants, but we know that will never meet the demand required. And I think, again, it's about this mixed economy of provision. I think you need all of these things to support low-income households. I don't think there's just one thing. I don't think a CDFI will be able to solve it all, a credit union or the social fund. I think those actors working collaboratively is in our view, the best approach.
Any other comments? No. So the next question, I suppose, is open to the panel as well, and it's how would the panel advise a credit union that is reluctant to link into debt advice services for fear of losing out on loan repayments as a result of sequestration options advice? Neil?
By pure coincidence, I'm going to go and talk to a couple of credit unions about this tomorrow, and a debt advice agency. It seems to me to be a growing issue of protected trust deeds, sequestration, and others. And I know of a number of credit unions who are very concerned around what they're seeing as which ends up being a kind of further liability. I know that is difficult, and you'd think that there are times where there's kind of strange bedfellows of a lender on one side and a debt agency on another. It often can be very difficult to kind of work both collaboratively and closely on these things. And I think Sharon's a great example of how it does work with her embedded kind of money and debt advisors. I am curious as to what the issue is around the rise in what seemed like a rise in protected trust deeds being issued, and whether that does have a negative impact on the lender's appetite to lend. I think it's something that is been raised with me on a number of occasions by lenders, and something we're going to try and find out a wee bit more about.
I think from our perspective, we originally set up Scotcash with the idea that we wanted a credit union partner straight off, and we got that partner through Glasgow Credit Union, one of the biggest credit unions in Scotland. When it came to convincing small local community-based credit unions that they should work with us for the benefit of our customers, it was a much more difficult conversation. It was a more difficult conversation because they saw us, as some still do, as competition, but also it was more difficult in terms of talking in the round about financial inclusion. And Neil's right that there's a real concern around trust deeds and the fact that as businesses, because let's face it, they, as we, are businesses, their fear around debts being written off and arrears increasing because of debt advice intervention. But I think that's really tackled best by having a conversation with those credit unions about the reality of debt advice and what debt advice can actually do for their customers, that can actually help them in terms of their arrears and their debt recovery programs, but also that they have probably a requirement, to think about their customers' financial health, long-term financial health. And this is something the Financial Conduct Authority has become much more involved in, about that longer-term support for customers who are facing financial distress. So I think the time is coming where it's not really a choice of whether or not, as a lender, you are looking out for your customers' financial health, but that you are mandated to do it. And in my view, rightly so. But again, there's an education piece there and bringing people along. And the way that we've managed to do it with credit unions is to talk about how we can support them, and debt advice agencies could do the same, is how we could support credit unions increase their reach in local communities. So we help to open credit union savings accounts, which obviously helps the credit union, and they send our customers where they are not able to help them because they're too risky. So if you can put it in the context of what is the business case that's probably for us been the most successful approach.
Okay, thanks for that, Sharon. So we're on to the last question now, so it's just a reminder if anyone wants to ask a last minute question to do so in the grey box. So the question we're on to now is, in Falkirk we partner Conduit and have had a lot of questions raised about the interest rate issue. I think what would help to reassure people would be a clearer outline that the role of providers is not to provide to those who would be accepted elsewhere, and then compare, as has been shown, to the payday lenders. Is that the sort of thing, Neil, that the video might show?
APR has been tricky on this for years. The essence of it is that on, as I say, on short-term small sum credit, it's very, very difficult. It's very easy to get very high-sounding numbers, which can be extremely confusing. The thing we would ask people to look at is the total cost of credit. In the case of Conduit, in the case of Scotcash, in the case of Moneyline, in the case of Fair for You, these organisations are lending to cover costs, nothing more. I'll give you a very, very short example if I have the time. So Moneyline in 2014 lent £10 million and wrote off about £1 million of that money. So they wrote off about 10%. They had 90 staff with a staff cost of about £1.6 million. They had 20 offices with an office cost of about £900,000. So they're about £3.5 million down before they've lent a penny. You know, so they're making about 20,000 loans in a year to try and generate 3.5 million of income, which is perfectly reasonable. They're a social business. They're trying to cover costs. You know, they're not taking subsidy. So to price to cover costs becomes difficult. Volume is the key to bringing down APR. Once we can start to get volume up, then APRs can come down because their unit costs don't go up to the same extent. So volume is a key issue for us here in terms of being able to drive down APR costs. The final point I'd make on is that none of these businesses, none of them, are in the business of gouging customers. They are looking to minimise costs, not maximise it. So they are priced at a point that is allowing them to run as a social business, because the alternative is stuff like, you know, nil interest loan schemes where you need a significant level of public subsidy, which just isn't there anymore.
Neil, that was really succinct in terms of the APR issue and the business that we're in terms of being sustainable. Really important to point that out. And I think additionally, people fear, and I know this from my own conversations right across Scotland, people fear that we're lending to people who can get credit cheaper elsewhere. And that simply isn't the case. It just isn't the case. And we probably as a sector maybe need to get that message across more clearly than we're obviously doing at the moment. Our customers' next alternative is the high cost short term market. It's the Provident, it's the Sunny Loans, it's the pounds to pocket. Now, to get a £500 loan from Sunny Loans over 26 weeks is going to cost you £993. That's a massive cost. And CDFIs can significantly reduce the interest that individual's paying. Our customers are not able to go to their bank and get an overdraft. They're not able to go to their bank and get a £500 loan because you can't get a £500 loan from the bank. You can only get a £500 loan from these high-cost lenders. Sometimes our customers are looking for £250. Some credit unions don't lend any less than £500 because it's not financially viable for them to do that. So I think as a sector, we need to be much more proactive at helping people understand that what we are not doing is taking individuals who could potentially get cheaper credit elsewhere. We are helping people move away from those really expensive lenders to a more affordable option for them, and one that is looking after their financial health more broadly.
I'll just add, if I can, that on the Carnegie UK Trust website, there are 2 videos related to APR, both 90 seconds long, one on animation and one featured in Michael Sheen. And there's also a short video, about 10 minutes long, showing the impact of borrowing money from lenders like Scotcash and others, talking to customers about their experiences, their direct experiences. And the final point I would make, I mean, Sharon mentioned how satisfied her customers always are, which is absolutely true. Fair for You, with over 3,000 FIFO Trustpilot reviews, are ranked number 3 with a score of 9.8 out of 10. Online with over 3,000 reviews, and Moneyline with over 500 reviews are ranked at 9.7 out of 10. Customers vote with their feet. Customers like those organisations because they know they are treated with dignity and respect, and they know that the service they get is vital to them, is valued and valuable. And all of this, and we come back to the very first point I made, credit is emotive. And it's sometimes easy when we can access credit, and it's not easy when you can't.
Thanks everyone. That's all the questions we could take for now. I think, Karen, you've asked me to put a slide up, which I think you should all be able to see now. I don't know if you want to say something about it.
Yeah, just a few words. Thanks very much to Neil and Sharon, who have explained so effectively and passionately why access to affordable credit is so important. And they've outlined some of the options models that are available that we would ask councils to consider. Now, we recognise that you need to think about what will work best in your constituent area, what works for local communities, but at the same time gives people a real choice and addresses as local needs. The Carnegie Trust UK, and to a lesser extent the Improvement Service, can help with any considerations you may have in relation to affordable credit, and we will share our contact details and also Sharon's. Neil has also said that he would be happy to be inundated with requests for support and assistance after this event, so please feel free to contact him directly, don't hold back. I'd like to thank you for listening into this webinar. I think affordable credit, as Sharon has said, will help councils meet their strategic objectives in relation to fairness, equality and anti-poverty strategies. But also there is a vested interest there. As Neil has said, the levels of rent arrears and council tax arrears are rising. So there's also an imperative in relation to maximising the income that people can get, councils, local authorities can get, to make sure that they have these kind of strategies in place and that will enable people to pay the debts that they have. So really, I'd just like to conclude by thanking you for attending, and particularly thanking Neil and Sharon for their contribution. Thanks very much. We will share a link to this webinar after the event, and we will also include a link to the video starring Michael Sheen that I'm sure you're all waiting to see. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.